For many, many years, environmental activists have been pushing Americans to adopt policies that would create a lower standard of living for future generations, based on the dubious theory that our pursuit of the good life is destroying our environment, if not the very planet itself. Pushing policies that literally would make us travel less and live in smaller and less comfortable homes, give up our cars and other modern conveniences, stop producing, manufacturing, and especially consuming. Well, we're not going to do that, and so they can never win this argument in the court of public opinion, really. They can't win this argument at the ballot box. They're not winning it in Congress, and they certainly have not won it with this White House. And so they're pushing it the best way that they can in the courts, because they're smart enough to know that it's the one branch left in government that liberals still mostly control. So these lawsuits are getting to where they sort of inform the entire debate now on several of the big environmental issues, including climate change. The most sympathetic plaintiffs imaginable, of course, are children. And so the highest profile case pending on global warming is known as the children's lawsuit, which seeks to end our use of oil, gas, and coal. The plaintiffs accuse the U.S. government, in this case, of endangering life itself because the government continues to allow our use of energy. By the way, it's interesting to note, if any of you have looked at the wording of this case, that the complaint claims that government's actions and inactions related to energy policy, quote, violate the younger generation's constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property. It's a little bit ironic when you think about the use of the word property in that sense, because the environmental industry's normal view, of course, is that their agenda trumps any view that the rest of us might have about a constitutional right to property. But I guess if it suits their benefit, they're willing to admit in this case that there is such a thing as a constitutional right to property. Anyway, that was a tangent. This suit was filed on behalf of 21 kids from the ages of 9 to 19, filed not by the kids themselves, of course, because they're just pawns, none of them are lawyers. Nevertheless, the children's lawsuit has captured the imagination of the news media and has won virtually all of the preliminary rulings. All of the government's the case was filed in 2015. All of the government's motions to dismiss the case by both the Obama and Trump administrations have been denied, including most recently by the U.S. Supreme Court. So the case is headed to trial this fall. The children's lawsuit is the culmination of a series of cases filed in all 50 states, all of them pushed and written by an environmental industry group called Our Children's Trust, whose members and staff and board, by the way, include no children. These people just presume to speak for all the children in the nation, although I haven't seen any evidence that any kids anywhere voted to elect or appoint them as representatives. But nonetheless, with an annual budget exceeding $1.5 million, this well-heeled group is funded by a lot of the usual suspects, the Rockefeller Brothers, Patagonia, Bauman Foundation, the Wallace Global Foundation, and others who fund a lot of today's national environmental lobby. Their names are well known here. So let's be clear on one thing on this issue. People on opposite sides of this global warming debate will never come to terms because they're not in the same debate. See, the bottom line in any environmental argument, whether you're talking about forest health or global warming or endangered species or property rights or public lands or whatever, the bottom line in all those debates always should be doing the right thing for the environment. The debate should be what's the right thing to do for the environment. Not always as simple as it sounds and not always what the debate's about, but I just tell people to apply this simple test. Ask yourself this question on any environmental debate, whether it's about forest health, endangered species, clean air, climate change, whatever. Ask yourself this simple question: will what they're talking about, what they're proposing, actually improve the environment? Let me give you an example. If you follow this debate, as most of you in this room do, you know that we've been told for many, many years now that the most dangerous of greenhouse gases is methane. And the largest source of methane gas on the planet is livestock. California, in fact, has officially legally authorized its EPA to regulate livestock flatulence as soon as some technology becomes available to do that. Since there isn't any such technology at the moment, the most common proposals, and there are proposals in more than half of all the states in the Union and in countries from Finland to New Zealand, the most common proposal is to levy a tax of $175 per cow on ranches that have more than 200 cows. So, you ask yourself the simple test, would that improve the environment? And the answer is, of course not. Cows don't actually have any way of knowing whether their owner has paid the tax. In fact, most cows don't know they have owners. And so they will just continue doing what ruminants with two stomachs do. So what would the result of a tax like that be? Either there would be fewer cows and therefore a smaller and more expensive food supply, or we'd have to import a larger percentage of our food like we do oil, or the number of animals would stay the same and government's revenues would go up. None of those scenarios have anything to do with the environment. They're all about money. If these people were really concerned about the environment and the planet, and think about this, if they really believed that livestock was destroying the capacity of the earth to support life, as is frequently claimed, why wouldn't they just propose to ban cows? And yet nobody talks about that. The IPCC has never proposed banning cows. Al Gore never once proposed banning cows. This children's lawsuit, in all the remedies that it seeks in government policy changes, does not seek to ban cows. They just want to raise money, all of which will come, by the way, from taxpayers and from big oil companies. And I can tell you, they really don't even want to kill the energy industry. I know that because they all drive cars and use plastics and live in air-conditioned houses. So here's the other thing that we ought to be clear about in all of our conversations about this. This lawsuit has absolutely nothing to do with children. Our Children's Trust, the organization, was founded by an attorney who's pushing 50. Her deputy is in his 60s. They have a number of employees who are staff attorneys and community organizers and fundraisers and outreach coordinators and so on, not one of whom are children. They are a highly educated lot, by the way. Almost all of them have law degrees. They have undergraduate training in international affairs, political science, geography, philosophy, even French. One of them is a former mental health counselor who once backpacked all the way across South America. The staff includes former employees of Greenpeace and Earth Justice and Food and Water Watch and other groups that specialize in similar lawsuits. Their board of directors, headed by a filmmaker, includes a clinical social worker, a West Virginia law professor, and a wealthy pharmaceutical software executive. It's actually a very impressive roster, but notice what's missing from every single one of all of those resumes. Science. Not a single one of them has any background whatsoever in meteorology or climate science or any other branch of science. Their lawsuit demands, among the remedies that it seeks, a whole series of policies based on the underlying statement that government's decisions ought to be science-based. But how in the world would this group know that it isn't? No, indeed, this has everything to do with politics and power and money, especially money, not with science. So as for the plaintiffs themselves, these 21 kids, who are they? One of them is the 16-year-old granddaughter of Dr. James Hansen, who Dr. Spencer mentioned earlier, the former NASA official who is often called the father of global warming. One of them is a 19-year-old Oregon girl who apparently had to abandon a camping trip because of a wildfire. One is a 15-year-old Boulder boy whose climate activism started at the age of 6. One is a farm boy in Kellogg whose allergies apparently are worse in warmer weather. There's a Roseburg boy who says he actually witnessed drastic snow retreat on Mount Hood, which, quote, adversely affected his use and enjoyment of the area. There is an 11-year-old whose family canceled a raft trip one year because the drought caused the water level in that river to be low. There's a 10-year-old who loves to swim but says she was afraid to go outside because it was too hot. There's a Navajo girl who started writing to President Obama when she was in elementary school, and the press has trotted her out as a climate expert ever since. There's a boy from Beaverton, Oregon, who says 2015 was the hottest year he can ever remember in his entire 13-year life. And a dozen others with similar complaints. All of these kids claim in this lawsuit that they are being denied the good life unless we stop using energy, throwing thousands of older people out of work and bankrupting our economy. They are children with no apparent idea of the importance of energy to their own prosperity or futures, and none of them wrote their own material. Some of them, by the way, make pretty good speeches at press conferences, but all of them were written for them. The case, as I said, might go to trial. It's filed in Oregon. It may go to trial as early as October. And I don't have any better crystal ball than anyone else in this room. I don't know what federal courts are going to do with this. Whichever way it comes out in the trial court, it's going to wind up in appeals courts. So I can't predict the outcome. Many of you in this room can make as good an educated guess on what federal courts will do with that. What I do know is that people on our side of this debate are going to continue to argue with data and with numbers and statistics and economic information and unemployment, and as Brooke Rollins was saying earlier, with pie charts, and very often forgetting to make the moral case. One of the reasons I was pleased to see Alex Epstein's name listed on the agenda for tonight, because he's one of the few people who wants to make the moral case about these issues, and we forget sometimes to talk about the old-fashioned concept of right and wrong. So here's my conclusion about all this, and hopefully you all will make the same argument every time you get a chance. If this organization and the donors who fund it and James Hansen want to debate their case about energy policy, that is their right. In fact, we welcome that debate, bring it on. But shame on them for using innocent children as their shield. I don't personally claim to be an expert on climate science, although I've studied it for a number of years. Science is very complex, and public policy perhaps even more complicated. These children ought to be left alone to grow up, go to school, learn something, and gain some life experiences that might eventually someday qualify them to come and educate the rest of us and make public policy. Thank you.